Hello, I'm Adam Shaw, and thank you so much for taking your time in voting for me. It really means a lot. I want to share a couple of personal stories here, just to give you some insight as to what I've learned from growing up in a lunatic asylum. And let's just start straight off the bat. I know some of you are thinking, oh, I can't call it the lunatic asylum, it's not politically correct. Well, I grew up in the 70s and 80s in this environment when political correctness didn't exist. So this was what it was called on a daily basis. Now, if you watched the last video I shot, you'll hear the story of when I was young and I watched a guy walk into a fire and burn alive in front of me. But this wasn't my first experience of death. Funnily enough, me and my friend, we used to wander around the grounds of this psychiatric hospital. Between where the staff accommodation was and the main hospital was this tiny little building. And we were so curious because it always seemed to be locked up. What was it? One day it was summer and it was blazing hot. We were sweating. And it was the first time I noticed on this tiny building there was a window that was just open a little bit at the top. It was quite high up. Me and my friend, I helped him up and he managed to squeeze through it, and then I managed to get up there and squeeze through the window. It must have taken us about 10 minutes because it was such a small window and we were quite fat. So there were layers of fat that we had to move through this window. But I plopped down and it was like a scene from Dexter. It was this clinical environment of silver surfaces, all completely sterile. This smell of disinfectant, sterile environment, this trolley next to us that was full of saws and scalpels and instruments. And in front of us, this huge silver door. I looked at my friend and I thought, let's open this door and see what's in there. When we opened it up, we saw this body shaped that was completely covered. Now I know that we should have known better, but we still weren't sure what it was. So me and my friend, we pulled the head of this shroud open. And what we saw was this ashen face, but more so than that, the skull had been cut around here and just placed back on the head. It was barely held together. Now I just watched Frankenstein very recently, and I'd watched this vampire film where somebody had been dead and they came alive and bit someone on the neck, and I was infused with terror in that moment. So much so, I took one look at my friend and the only thing going on in my mind was, I need to be the first one out that window. Now it took us about 10 minutes to get in the window. It took me about 10 seconds to get out. And I realized that day that when under the right situation or the wrong situation, depending how you want to put it, that the human body is capable of amazing things. More so, I went head first out that window. How I didn't crack my head on the concrete floor still remains a mystery to me this day. It wasn't until later, I was about 14, we were on a school trip. I'd been overweight since about the age of 8. I'd had all sorts of names called to me. For anybody in England that remembers the series Grange Hill, well, there was a really fat kid in it called Roland Browning. Well, that was one of my nicknames, along with all sorts of far less pleasant derivatives of being overweight. So I was used to all the stick, but I sat there on the coach one day and we were going up the motorway heading towards Alton Towers. That's our equivalent of Disneyland. Much smaller, but roller coasters, the rides, it was a school trip, we were excited. And I was minding my own business, eating my bag of chocolates, and suddenly, slowly overtaking us, and I hadn't noticed it at first, this huge articulated lorry. And as it drove up by the side of us, moving at what seemed to be an inch a second to overtake us, emblazoned across the side was Adam's Foods. Somebody in the coach then turned round and said, "It's all right, Ads, your packed lunch has arrived." Although I can see the humour of that now, and it was very witty, at the time I was traumatised. And that was the moment that I decided I didn't want to be fat anymore. And that was the moment I realised that I had to do something. I had to make a decision. You know, I'd grown up in this environment of lunacy. And I used to get a lot of stick at school. I didn't really feel I could connect with my parents to talk about the deeper stuff with them. So ironically, it was up in the hospital I used to talk to the lunatics. And I'd visit my mum and dad on their wards, and my dad used to take me into this guy who was always brilliant with us, with me and my sister. I'd sit down and I'd talk to him about the stick I got at school, about being called a lunatic, about being called fat, and some much nastier names than that. And he said, look, people will always judge what they don't understand. People will always, when something's wrong within their own heart, they will find fault in other people. And he said, what this is doing is preparing you for life. This experience that you've got in the lunatic asylum. Now, I don't think he used that word, but he said this experience that you're getting right now is preparing you for something bigger. Now, I didn't fully understand that at the time, but all I knew is that I always used to leave this guy feeling better. And my dad trusted him, which is quite incredible because it was several years afterwards that I found out this guy had been sectioned for shooting his wife. So it just goes to show you that everybody can be sensible and lunatic at the same time. And I didn't really understand the true lunacy until I left the asylum. Now, if you've ever felt that there's part of you that's a lunatic, that there must be, and one of the symptoms is you wake up regularly and you don't feel energized. Well, I felt like that. That's lunacy. When I worked in this Japanese merchant bank, I realized that it was the same energy as being in the hospital with the patients that had been drugged up and walking around the grounds with no energy. It was the same in the bank because so many of them hated their job. They hated it. And these were the sane people. Every day they'd go in, they'd complain. They'd find things wrong with everyone and everything. This was the real lunacy because these guys had a choice. These were the sane people. Then I went to work in an American fat camp. Now, I'd worked in summer camps in the United States for 5 summers and I'd seen various things. But when I was at the fat camp, I realized what they did was they bring in a lot of fat kids. They tell them that they can't eat chocolate, they can't eat French fries, they have to exercise all day, and they have to eat much less than they used to. So what I found, they had no energy and certain foods were demonized. Simultaneously, they educated them and said, you can eat anything you like as long as it's in moderation. So they weren't really practicing what they preached. And I realized that through this demonization of food, it created guilt. So that if they were to have chocolate or French fries, there's this mindset, well, I've lost it now, I'm off the diet, and this sabotage kicks in. And this happens so many times with people. So what I found is when I started working with people, that no foods were demonized. You can eat anything you like, drink anything you want, but we'd work sustainably over time. The problem is that I've found that so many people are looking for a quick fix. They get promised on these diets they can lose loads of weight really quick. And they overestimate what's possible. Because they think if they lose 6 kilos in the first week, that they'll lose 6 kilos in the second. But the kids were losing a lot of weight in the first week and hardly any in the second through keeping on the strict regime. It was damaging psychologically for them and they weren't losing weight sustainably. And this was ultimately bad for their heart. I found this in the hospital, the same thing. People wanted quick fixes, but they weren't prepared to make that decision. They hadn't had that moment on the couch like I'd had, where there was so much pain that you had to make a decision and you had to lose weight. So when I work with people, I just realized that this was more sustainable. Let's plan for the long term. Let's eat and drink whatever you want, but it doesn't matter. And what I realized that day when I saw that person dead in that morgue, we're all going to die one day, everybody. And I've worked with people at the end of their life that were facing death. And the overriding question that you will have when you get there is, did I really live? And if you want to really live, then make the decision to die, to wake up energized every morning, to feel better, and to just be more authentic. And that's my message to you.